The city was already buzzing with life as the sun barely peeked over the skyline. It was a typical morning for Emily Scott, a single mother who had long since grown accustomed to the early hours. Her alarm had gone off at 5:30 a.m., but she had been awake even before then, lying in bed and mentally preparing herself for another exhausting day. She glanced at her phone, quickly scrolling through the never-ending bills and overdue notices before taking a deep breath. There was no time to feel overwhelmed. Her daughter, Lily, still slept peacefully in the next room, her blonde curls spilling over her pillow in a halo of innocence. Emily took a moment to watch her, smiling softly at the peaceful scene before the whirlwind of the day began. Her small apartment was cozy, though worn around the edges. The kitchen was cluttered with half-finished homework assignments, old takeout containers, and reminders of the life she was trying so hard to hold together. At 34, Emily had mastered the art of multitasking. She worked 2 jobs cleaning houses during the day and working as a waitress at a local diner by night. Her schedule was chaotic, but it was what she needed to keep food on the table and the rent paid. Barely. As she moved about the kitchen, prepping Lily's lunch for school, she thought back to her dreams of a better life. Once upon a time, she had planned to go to college, earn a degree, and create a future full of opportunity. But life had other plans. Lily's father had left when their daughter was only a few months old, and Emily had been juggling motherhood and work ever since. There was no time for self-pity, only survival. Mom Lily's small voice interrupted her thoughts. Emily turned, smiling brightly as her daughter shuffled into the kitchen, still rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Good morning, sweetheart. Ready for school today?" Lily nodded, though the excitement of her answer didn't quite match her drowsy expression. Emily quickly set her breakfast down: toast and scrambled eggs, nothing fancy but enough to give her energy for the day. After a rushed morning routine, they were out the door, navigating the bustling city streets as they made their way to the bus stop. The wind was sharp, biting at their cheeks, but Emily held Lily's hand tightly, her resolve strong. They couldn't afford to be late, not today. After dropping Lily off at school, Emily had a full schedule of houses to clean before heading to the diner for her evening shift. As they arrived at the bus stop, Emily gave her daughter a tight hug. "Remember to be good, okay? I'll see you tonight." Lily smiled up at her, her bright eyes filled with trust and love. "I will, Mom." Emily watched as her daughter boarded the bus, waving until it disappeared down the street. The moment the bus was out of sight, she let out a long breath, pulling her jacket tighter around her as she turned to head to her first job of the day. On the other side of the city, Jonathan Pierce was starting his morning in a much different way. The CEO of Pierce Technologies, a leading firm in the tech industry, Jonathan lived in a penthouse high above the noise of the city streets. His mornings were quiet and calculated, beginning with a workout and followed by a detailed schedule curated by his assistant. Every minute of his day was accounted for, from business meetings to client calls. It was the kind of life he had always wanted, one where he was in control. At 40, Jonathan was the embodiment of success. His company was booming, and his name carried weight in the business world. Yet, behind the carefully constructed image, there was an emptiness that he rarely acknowledged. After losing his wife to cancer 5 years earlier, Jonathan had buried himself in work. He had distanced himself from anything that could cause him emotional pain, building walls so high that even his closest friends barely knew the man inside. Today was a particularly important day for Jonathan. He had a high-stakes meeting with investors, one that could shape the future of his company. But as he prepared for the day, slipping on his custom-tailored suit and glancing at the skyline view, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. He pushed the thought away as he always did and grabbed his briefcase, heading out the door with the usual sense of purpose. As his chauffeur drove him through the city, Jonathan scrolled through his phone, responding to emails and finalizing details for the meeting. The rain had started to fall lightly, dotting the windows of the car as they wove through traffic. The city moved around him in a blur, people rushing to their destinations, unaware of the powerful man passing by in the back seat. Jonathan's life was a far cry from the struggles of the people on the street. Yet as he watched them, a strange feeling of isolation washed over him. He was surrounded by success but disconnected from the world in a way he couldn't quite explain. Even his vast wealth couldn't fill the void left by his wife's death. Work had become his escape, and as long as he kept moving, kept building his empire, he could avoid the pain lurking just beneath the surface. Back in Emily's world, the day had already started to take its toll. After cleaning her first 2 houses, she was rushing to catch the train to her next job when she noticed a commotion up ahead. A crowd had gathered near a secluded alleyway, and Emily's instincts told her to steer clear. But something pulled her closer, and as she approached, she saw a man lying on the ground, motionless. Her heart raced as she pushed through the onlookers. "Someone call an ambulance," she shouted, dropping to her knees beside the man. Without hesitation, she checked for a pulse. It was faint, but there. She began administering CPR, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. Minutes passed, and just as Emily began to fear the worst, the man took a ragged breath. Relief washed over her as the sound of sirens approached and paramedics arrived to take over. As they loaded the man onto a stretcher, one of the paramedics turned to Emily, a look of appreciation on his face. "You saved his life," he said simply. Emily nodded, stepping back as they hurried him into the ambulance. She watched as the vehicle disappeared into the traffic, her heart still pounding. She hadn't thought twice about jumping in to help. Her instincts had taken over. But now, as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in, she wondered who the man was and whether he would even remember her. With a final glance at the now empty alleyway, Emily hurried off to her next job, the rain falling harder as the city continued to move around her. Emily moved through her afternoon with the weight of the earlier events still sitting heavy in her chest. The memory of the man lying on the pavement, lifeless, until she brought him back, replayed in her mind. She hadn't even gotten his name. The commotion had been chaotic, and she had left the scene as quickly as possible, not wanting to get caught up in questions she had no time to answer. Her life didn't have room for lingering. By the time her shift at the diner rolled around that evening, her feet were aching, and exhaustion tugged at her every move. But there was no choice but to power through. She had mouths to feed, bills to pay, and a daughter depending on her. The dim lights of the diner and the constant hum of customers provided a small distraction, but every time she paused, the morning's events surfaced again. "Table 5 needs water," called Patty, one of her co-workers, snapping her back to reality. Emily nodded, grabbing a pitcher and making her way over to the table. The dinner rush was winding down, and she moved between tables with practiced ease, her face showing none of the fatigue she felt. She forced a smile as she greeted the patrons, but inside her mind wandered. Meanwhile, in a high-end hospital on the other side of the city, Jonathan Pierce lay in a hospital bed, groggy but alive. His chest felt tight, and his mind was clouded with a mixture of confusion and discomfort. The last thing he remembered was walking out of his office, his phone in his hand, thinking about the meeting he had that afternoon. Then, nothing, just darkness. He had collapsed, and now he was waking up in a sterile room, the beeping of machines the only sound besides his own breathing. As the nurse entered to check on him, Jonathan's mind began to clear. What happened? His voice was hoarse, and his throat felt dry. The nurse smiled kindly as she adjusted the machines beside him. "You had a heart attack, Mr. Pierce. You were very lucky." "Lucky?" he asked, still trying to piece together the fragments of his memory. "How?" She continued to check his vitals as she explained. "You collapsed in an alleyway, and a passerby performed CPR. You were unresponsive for several minutes before the paramedics arrived, but thanks to that woman's quick thinking, you made it." Jonathan's brow furrowed as he processed the information. "A woman saved me? Do you know who she was?" The nurse shook her head. "She didn't stay long after the paramedics took over. But if it hadn't been for her, well, I don't think you'd be here now." Jonathan lay back against the pillows, his mind racing. Someone had saved his life, and he had no idea who she was. The thought gnawed at him, and a strange sense of unease settled in his chest. He wasn't used to feeling powerless, and the idea that a complete stranger had saved him, had seen him at his most vulnerable, left him feeling off balance. He had built his entire life around control, around knowing everything that went on in his world. And now his very life had been spared by someone he couldn't even thank. "Find her," Jonathan muttered, his voice still weak. The nurse looked at him, unsure she had heard him correctly. "Sir." Jonathan's eyes met hers, filled with determination. "I need to find her." The woman who saved me. The nurse hesitated for a moment before nodding. I'll see what I can do, Mr. Pierce, but I don't have much to go on. Jonathan's mind churned, already beginning to calculate how he could track down this mysterious woman. He wasn't a man who let things go unanswered. He owed her his life, and he wasn't the type to leave a debt unpaid. Back at the diner, Emily was finishing her shift, her thoughts still distracted. As the last customers filtered out and the staff began to clean up, she felt her phone buzz in her pocket. It was a message from Lily's babysitter, letting her know that everything was fine at home. Emily smiled faintly, grateful for the small relief that her daughter was safe and sound. "Long day?" Patty asked, wiping down a nearby table. "You could say that," Emily replied, letting out a sigh. "I just can't shake something that happened earlier today." Patty glanced at her curiously. "What's up?" Emily hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should bring it up. "I was walking to my next job this morning and saw a guy collapse in the street. I had to do CPR. I think I saved his life." Patty stopped cleaning, her eyes wide with surprise. "Are you serious? That's amazing, Emily. You're a hero." Emily shook her head quickly. No, I'm not a hero. I just did what anyone would do." "Not everyone would have the guts to do CPR on a stranger like that," Patty said, her voice filled with admiration. "You should be proud." But Emily wasn't sure how she felt. She hadn't thought of herself as brave. The moment had just happened, and she had reacted. She hadn't even stayed to see what happened after the paramedics arrived. And now, as she stood there in the empty diner, she couldn't help but wonder about the man she had saved. Was he all right? Would he even remember what happened? "Yeah, I guess," Emily murmured, her thoughts still far away. As she clocked out and left the diner, the rain had started up again, soft and steady. She pulled her coat tighter around her, making her way to the bus stop. Her mind drifted back to Lily, and the thought of getting home to her daughter helped ease some of the tension in her chest. No matter what the day threw at her, she always had Lily to keep her grounded. Days passed, and Jonathan's determination to find the woman who saved him only grew. He had pulled every string he could, enlisting the help of private investigators, and even using his connections at the hospital to track down any leads. But so far, nothing had turned up. It was as if the woman had vanished into thin air. Sitting in his office, Jonathan stared out at the city skyline, frustration gnawing at him. His life had been altered in ways he hadn't expected, and the mystery of his savior weighed heavily on his mind. It wasn't just about thanking her, there was something deeper he couldn't explain. He felt a strange connection to this unknown woman, and he couldn't rest until he found her. As he sifted through more reports on possible leads, his assistant knocked on the door and entered, holding a small folder. "Mr. Pierce, I think we might have found her." Jonathan's head snapped up, his heart pounding. "You found her?" His assistant nodded, placing the folder on his desk. "Her name is Emily Scott. She works 2 jobs, one as a house cleaner and another as a waitress at a diner. According to the report, she's a single mother. She's the woman who saved your life." Jonathan opened the folder, his eyes scanning the details inside. The more he read, the more intrigued he became. Emily Scott, a single mother living paycheck to paycheck, and yet she had saved his life without expecting anything in return. He stared at her photo, a simple picture of her and her daughter, their smiles bright despite the modest backdrop of their lives. A sense of purpose filled him as he closed the folder. He needed to meet her, to thank her in person. But more than that, he felt compelled to help her. This woman had changed his life in more ways than one, and now he would change hers. Days after learning the identity of the woman who saved him, Jonathan Pierce sat in his sleek office, staring at Emily Scott's photo again. Something about her drew him in. She wasn't like the people in his world, polished executives with practiced smiles. She seemed genuine, grounded in a way that he had lost touch with over the years. He felt an inexplicable connection to her, and he knew he had to meet her. He owed her more than just a thank you. Jonathan's assistant, Helen, had already arranged the meeting. At first, Emily had been reluctant. The assistant had said Emily didn't want anything in return for her actions. That only intrigued Jonathan more. Most people would have jumped at the opportunity to connect with someone like him, a CEO with power and wealth. But not Emily. She hadn't even stayed to claim recognition for saving his life. Now, as he waited for her to arrive, Jonathan felt an unusual sense of anticipation. It had been years since he felt this way, eager to meet someone not for business, but for something more personal. He couldn't quite name what it was yet. Across town, Emily Scott sat nervously on the bus, clutching her bag in her lap. She still couldn't believe she had agreed to this. When the CEO of Pierce Technologies had reached out, she had nearly turned him down. What did a man like him want with her? He was rich, powerful, and completely out of her world. She was a single mother struggling to keep her head above water. What could they possibly have in common? But curiosity had gotten the better of her. After all, she had saved his life. Maybe this was just his way of thanking her. Still, she felt out of place. Her worn coat and second-hand shoes stood in stark contrast to the polished office buildings she passed on her way to his headquarters. She knew she didn't belong in his world, and the thought made her stomach turn. As the bus came to a stop, Emily stepped off and looked up at the towering building in front of her. Pierce Technologies. The name gleamed on the side of the structure, reflecting the sunlight in a way that felt almost blinding. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her shoulders and walked inside. Jonathan was reviewing reports when Helen knocked on his door. "She's here, sir," she said, her voice professional as always. Jonathan nodded, standing up and straightening his tie. "Send her in." The door opened, and Emily walked in, her steps hesitant. She looked around the luxurious office, feeling more out of place than ever. The space was immaculate, polished floors, sleek furniture, and a stunning view of the city skyline. Everything about it screamed wealth and power. Emily felt small in comparison, her thrift store clothes and tired eyes betraying the weight of her daily struggles. Jonathan's gaze softened as he saw her. She looked exactly as he had imagined, humble, kind, and weary from the life she led. But there was something strong in her eyes, a quiet determination that commanded his respect. "Emily," Jonathan said, stepping forward. "Thank you for coming." Emily gave a small nod, shifting awkwardly. I wasn't sure if I should. I didn't really do anything that special." Jonathan smiled, gesturing for her to sit down. "You saved my life. That's more than special." She hesitated before sitting, folding her hands tightly in her lap. "I didn't do it for recognition, Mr. Pierce. I don't know. I did what I thought anyone would do." Jonathan sat across from her, his eyes studying her with an intensity that made Emily uncomfortable. "Not everyone would have stepped in the way you did. You didn't hesitate, and because of that, I'm here today." Emily shifted in her seat, unsure how to respond. She wasn't used to being praised, especially by someone like him. She felt a lump in her throat, realizing that for once, someone had noticed her, really noticed her. But she didn't want to let that show. "I'm glad you're okay," she said quietly. Jonathan nodded, leaning forward slightly. "I wanted to meet you in person to thank you, but I also wanted to do more. I've read about your situation, working 2 jobs, raising a daughter on your own. You're remarkable, Emily. I think you deserve better." Emily's stomach tightened. This was exactly what she had been afraid of. He wanted to reward her for saving him, but that wasn't why she had done it. "Mr. Pierce," she began, her voice wavering, "I don't need anything. Really. I'm managing just fine." Jonathan's expression softened. "I'm not offering charity, Emily. I'm offering you an opportunity. I believe you're capable of so much more than what you're doing now. I'd like to offer you a position here, at Pierce Technologies." Emily blinked, her mind reeling. "A position? Here? But I don't know anything about tech or whatever it is you do here." Jonathan chuckled lightly. "That doesn't matter. I need someone I can trust, someone with integrity, who's quick to act and doesn't back down when things get tough. That's what I see in you. I want to offer you a job as my personal assistant." Emily's mouth went dry. Personal assistant? It sounded like something out of a movie. A job at a place like this could change her entire life. The pay, the benefits, it could give Lily the kind of future Emily had always dreamed of, but never thought she could provide. But even as the offer hung in the air, doubt clouded her mind. What if she wasn't good enough? What if this was a mistake? I don't know," Emily stammered. "I've never done anything like that before." Jonathan's tone remained calm, but his voice carried conviction. I've built this company by taking risks, Emily. I see something in you. All I ask is that you take a chance on yourself. Let me give you the tools to change your life." Emily sat in silence, her mind racing. This was everything she had ever wanted, a way out of the endless cycle of struggle. But it also terrified her. She had never worked in an office, never handled anything as important as what Jonathan was suggesting. Could she really do this? "What about my daughter?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't have the money for childcare." Jonathan leaned back, a small smile playing on his lips. "I can arrange for childcare, no problem. I'll make sure you have the support you need." Emily's heart pounded in her chest. This was too good to be true. No one had ever offered her something like this before, something that could lift her and Lily out of the struggle they had known for so long. And yet, a part of her still hesitated, afraid of what it would mean to step into a world so far removed from her own. After a long moment of silence, Emily nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll do it." Jonathan's smile widened, and he stood, extending his hand to her. "Welcome to Pierce Technologies, Emily." She shook his hand, still feeling like she was in a dream. But as she left his office and stepped back out into the bustling city, a new feeling settled over her hope. For the first time in years, the future didn't look quite so daunting. The next few days were a whirlwind for Emily as she adjusted to her new job at Pierce Technologies. The transition from her old life to the corporate world felt like stepping into a completely different reality. Gone were the worn-out uniforms of her cleaning jobs and waitressing shifts, replaced by the sleek, professional attire Jonathan had arranged for her. Even the office environment felt foreign. Everything was polished, efficient, and fast-paced. But for all the luxury and comfort, Emily couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she didn't belong. The other employees at Pierce Technologies seemed to sense it too. They were polite but distant, their eyes filled with curiosity and, in some cases, judgment. She overheard whispers in the break room about her sudden appearance in the CEO's office and her unorthodox hiring. People questioned how she had landed the job with no experience. Some even speculated that there was more to her relationship with Jonathan than met the eye. Emily tried to ignore the gossip, but it weighed on her more than she wanted to admit. She had always prided herself on her work ethic, on the fact that she earned everything she had through hard work. But here she couldn't shake the feeling that people saw her as nothing more than a charity case, a single mother plucked from obscurity by a wealthy CEO out of some misplaced sense of gratitude. Despite her doubts, Emily threw herself into the job. Jonathan had been patient with her, allowing her time to learn the ropes, but he also expected excellence. The work was demanding, scheduling meetings, managing travel plans, fielding calls from high-profile clients. There was so much to learn, and every day felt like a test of her ability to keep up. The pace was relentless, but Emily refused to let it break her. This job was her lifeline, a chance to finally build a better future for herself and Lily. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at the office, Emily returned home feeling drained. She had been trying so hard to prove herself, to show that she was worthy of the opportunity Jonathan had given her, but the pressure was beginning to take its toll. As she unlocked the door to her small apartment, she was greeted by the familiar sight of Lily's smiling face. "Mom, look at the drawing I made at school today," Lily exclaimed, running up to her with a colorful picture in hand. Emily forced a tired smile, kneeling down to look at the drawing. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," she said, her voice soft but weary. "You're such a great artist." Lily beamed with pride, but as she hugged her daughter, Emily felt a pang of guilt. She had been so focused on her new job, on trying to fit into Jonathan's world, that she hadn't been spending as much time with Lily. The long hours at Pierce Technologies meant she often came home late, leaving Lily in the care of her babysitter. And even when she was home, her mind was constantly racing with thoughts of work, of how to keep up and prove herself. "Are you okay, Mom?" Lily asked, her voice small but filled with concern. Emily nodded, brushing a strand of hair away from Lily's face. "I'm fine, sweetie. Just a little tired." That night, after putting Lily to bed, Emily sat at the kitchen table, staring at the pile of bills she had been struggling to keep up with. The job at Pierce Technologies was supposed to be a blessing, a way out of the financial burden that had been weighing her down for so long. But now, with the pressure of the job and the growing distance between her and Lily, Emily couldn't help but wonder if she was losing something even more important. At the office, Jonathan noticed the shift in Emily's demeanor. She was still doing her job well, but there was a tension about her, a heaviness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. One afternoon, as they were wrapping up a meeting, Jonathan asked her to stay behind. "Emily, how are you holding up?" he asked, his tone softer than usual. Emily looked up from her notepad, surprised by the question. "I'm fine, just adjusting." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, studying her for a moment. "I know this job can be overwhelming at first. It's a big change from what you're used to. But I want you to know that I didn't hire you because I felt obligated. I hired you because I believe you can handle it." Emily nodded, but her mind was still clouded with doubt. "I'm trying, but I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm in over my head. And people in the office, they talk." Jonathan's expression darkened slightly. "What do they say?" They think I only got this job because of what happened. Because I saved you." Emily's voice trembled slightly as she spoke, the weight of the office rumors finally spilling out. "I don't want people to think I don't deserve to be here." Jonathan's jaw tightened. He had heard similar murmurs, though he had brushed them aside, confident that Emily would prove herself in time. But hearing how much it affected her, he realized how much pressure she was under. "Listen to me," he said firmly, leaning forward. "You earned your place here, Emily. Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't deserve this. People will always talk, but you're not here for them, you're here for you and your daughter." His words hit Emily harder than she expected. For so long, she had been fighting to prove herself, to show that she was more than the circumstances life had thrown at her. And now, for the first time, someone was telling her she didn't need to keep fighting, that she was enough as she was. "Thank you," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. Jonathan's expression softened. "You're doing great. I see how hard you're working, and I have no doubt that you'll succeed here. Just give it time." Emily nodded, feeling a small sense of relief wash over her. She wasn't alone in this. Jonathan believed in her, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough to keep going. However, things were far from easy at the office. Despite Jonathan's reassurances, Emily continued to face subtle hostility from some of her colleagues. A few weeks into her new role, she noticed that some of the other assistants would exclude her from conversations or give her looks when they passed by in the hallway. It was clear that they didn't see her as one of them, and it made the work environment feel even more isolating. One day, as she was organizing files for a big client meeting, one of her co-workers, Rebecca, a senior assistant, approached her with a tight smile. "So how's life in the big leagues?" Rebecca asked, her tone dripping with condescension. Emily forced a polite smile. "It's going well, thanks." Rebecca leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I have to say, you're lucky to be in the CEO's good graces. Most people have to work for years to get the kind of access you have." Emily stiffened at the insinuation. "I'm just doing my job." Rebecca raised an eyebrow, her smile widening. "Sure, if that's what you want to call it." Emily felt her face flush with anger, but she held her tongue. She couldn't afford to get into it with Rebecca not here, not now. She turned back to her work, her hands trembling slightly as she filed the documents. But Rebecca's words lingered in her mind long after she had walked away. The doubt crept back in, gnawing at the edges of her confidence. Maybe Rebecca was right. Maybe she didn't belong here. Maybe this was all just a mistake. But as Emily thought about Lily, about the future she wanted to build for her daughter, she knew she couldn't give up. No matter what anyone said, she had to keep pushing forward. For Lily, for herself. She wasn't going to let anyone take this opportunity away from her. The tension in the office had been growing for weeks, and Emily could feel it weighing on her every day. The constant whispers and cold stares were getting harder to ignore, but she refused to let them break her. She reminded herself that she was there for a reason, that Jonathan had chosen her, because he believed in her abilities, not out of pity. Still, the pressure of balancing work, motherhood, and the office dynamics was starting to take its toll. One evening, after a particularly difficult day at work, Jonathan called Emily into his office. She had been expecting another assignment or an update on one of his many projects, but there was a different tone to his voice that made her pause. "Emily, please sit down," Jonathan said, gesturing toward the chair in front of his desk. His expression was serious, but there was a warmth in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. Emily sat down, her hands nervously clasped in her lap. "Is everything okay?" Jonathan leaned forward, his hands resting on the desk. "I've been thinking a lot about how things have been going for you here. I know it hasn't been easy, and I've heard the rumors going around the office." Emily's heart sank. She had tried so hard to ignore the gossip, but knowing that Jonathan was aware of it made her feel even more exposed. "I've been trying not to let it affect me," she said quietly. "I know," Jonathan said, his voice softening. "But it's not right. You shouldn't have to deal with that kind of treatment, especially after everything you've done." Emily looked down at her hands, feeling a wave of emotion rise in her chest. It had been so long since anyone had stood up for her, since anyone had truly seen the effort she put into surviving every day. She had grown so used to fighting her battles alone that it felt strange to have someone in her corner. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jonathan stood and walked around the desk, leaning against the edge of it as he looked down at her. "I want to make sure you understand something, Emily. You've earned your place here. I didn't give you this job out of pity, or because of what happened that day. I hired you because I saw potential in you, because I knew you could handle it." Emily looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "But what if I can't? What if I can't? What if I'm just not good enough?" Jonathan shook his head. "You're more than good enough. You've been proving that every day, whether you realize it or not. And the people in this office who are giving you a hard time, they're threatened by you because they know you've got something special." Emily's breath caught in her throat. For so long, she had felt like she was barely keeping her head above water, just trying to survive each day. To hear Jonathan say that he believed in her, that she had something special, was almost too much to take in. "I don't know what to say," Emily said, her voice trembling. "You don't have to say anything," Jonathan replied. "I just wanted you to know that I've got your back. And I'm not the only one." Emily looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" Jonathan smiled. "I've been talking to some of the senior executives and we've decided to offer you a promotion." Emily's eyes widened in shock. "A promotion? But I've only been here for a few months. I'm not ready for that." Jonathan chuckled. "You're more ready than you think. The work you've been doing has been exceptional, and you've handled every challenge I've thrown your way. We want to move you into a more strategic role, something that will allow you to use your instincts and problem-solving skills." Emily sat back in her chair, her mind reeling. A promotion? It was more than she could have imagined. The opportunity to move up in the company, to secure a better future for herself and Lily, was right in front of her. But along with the excitement came a wave of fear. Could she really do it? Could she handle even more responsibility, with everything else she was already juggling? "I don't know if I can take on more," Emily admitted, her voice soft. "I'm barely keeping up as it is." Jonathan's expression grew serious. "I understand that you've got a lot on your plate, Emily, but I wouldn't be offering this to you if I didn't believe you could handle it. I'll make sure you have the support you need. We can arrange more flexible hours. And we'll cover any additional childcare costs for Lily. You won't be alone in this." Emily's heart pounded in her chest. This was the kind of opportunity she had always dreamed of, the kind that could change her life and Lily's for the better. But the fear of failure, of letting Jonathan and everyone else down, weighed heavily on her. After a long moment of silence, Emily finally nodded. "Okay, I'll do it." Jonathan smiled, a look of satisfaction in his eyes. "I knew you would." As Emily left Jonathan's office that evening, she felt a mixture of emotions swirling inside her. The promise of a better future filled her with hope, but the fear of stepping into the unknown lingered at the edges of her mind. She had fought so hard to get this far, and now she was being given a chance to rise even higher. But with that opportunity came the pressure to succeed, to prove that she was worthy of the faith Jonathan had placed in her. Back at home, Emily sat at the kitchen table, watching Lily color a picture at the other end of the table. The simple act of watching her daughter focus so intently on her artwork brought a sense of calm to Emily's racing mind. "Mommy, look," Lily said, holding up her drawing. It's a picture of us in a big house with a backyard. I'm going to have a swing set, and we can have a dog too." Emily smiled softly, her heart aching with love for her daughter. "That's a beautiful picture, sweetheart." Lily beamed with pride, then went back to her coloring, humming softly to herself. As Emily watched her, she thought about everything she had been through to get to this point, every long night, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt. And now, standing on the edge of something new and terrifying, she realized that all of it had led her here. She still wasn't sure if she could handle the promotion, or if she truly belonged in the world Jonathan had opened up to her. But one thing she knew for certain: she was doing this for Lily. She wanted to give her daughter the life she deserved, a life filled with opportunities and stability. And if that meant stepping out of her comfort zone, facing her fears, and proving herself to everyone around her, then she would do it. For Lily. For herself. In the weeks that followed, Emily found herself stepping into her new role with both excitement and trepidation. The promotion brought more responsibilities, and the demands of the job became greater than she had ever imagined. But true to his word, Jonathan ensured she had the support she needed. He arranged for flexible hours and covered the cost of a full-time nanny for Lily, freeing Emily from the constant stress of balancing work and motherhood. At first, the adjustment was difficult. There were late nights spent poring over company reports, learning the intricacies of the business world that had once seemed so foreign to her. But gradually, Emily found her stride. The strategic role Jonathan had given her allowed her to use her instincts in ways she never had before, and soon, she was offering valuable insights during meetings that impressed even the most seasoned executives. The whispers and gossip from her colleagues didn't disappear overnight, but as Emily's competence became more apparent, the tone shifted. Her co-workers began to take notice of her hard work and determination. Even Rebecca, who had once treated her with such disdain, started to soften, offering small gestures of camaraderie. It wasn't easy, but Emily had earned their respect, not through favors or luck, but through her dedication and skill. One afternoon, as Emily was finalizing details for an important presentation, Jonathan appeared at her office door, a rare smile on his face. "You're becoming quite the force around here, Emily," he said, his voice filled with a sense of pride. Emily looked up from her work, smiling back. "I'm just trying to keep up." Jonathan shook his head. "No, you're doing more than that. You've exceeded every expectation I had for you." His words filled Emily with a sense of accomplishment she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just about the promotion or the financial security she now had, it was about proving to herself that she was capable of so much more than she had ever thought possible. "There's something else I wanted to talk to you about," Jonathan continued, stepping into the office. "We're expanding the company's reach into a new market, and I think you'd be a perfect fit to lead the project." Emily's eyes widened. "Lead the project? But that's a huge responsibility." Jonathan nodded. "I know, but you've shown that you can handle it. You have the skills, the drive, and the instincts. I believe in you, Emily." Emily felt a surge of gratitude and pride welling up inside her. She had spent so much of her life feeling like she was always a step behind, always struggling to catch up. But now, she was being offered a seat at the table, a chance to shape her own future. She thought of Lily, of the picture her daughter had drawn of their dream house, and knew that this opportunity was a step toward making that dream a reality. "I'll do it," Emily said, her voice filled with quiet confidence. "I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Jonathan replied, his smile widening. "You've proven yourself time and time again, and I'm proud to have you on the team." Months passed, and as the project moved forward, Emily's confidence grew. She thrived in her new role, managing teams, negotiating deals, and overseeing every detail with a level of expertise that surprised even her. The opportunities Jonathan had given her had opened doors she never thought possible, and for the first time in her life, Emily felt like she was in control of her future. Outside of work, life with Lily had never been better. The steady income and flexible hours allowed Emily to spend more time with her daughter, and the stability of their new life brought a sense of peace that Emily had longed for. They had even started looking at houses, real houses, with backyards and room for a swing set, just like Lily had dreamed of. One evening, after a long but fulfilling day at work, Emily and Lily sat together on the couch, watching a movie. The soft glow of the TV filled the room, and Lily rested her head against her mother's shoulder, her eyes growing heavy with sleep. "Mommy," Lily murmured, her voice soft and drowsy, "are we going to get a dog when we get our new house?" Emily smiled, brushing a strand of hair away from her daughter's face. "Maybe. We'll see." Lily's eyes fluttered shut, and as Emily held her close, she couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. Just months ago, she had been struggling to make ends meet, working 2 jobs and barely keeping her head above water. But now their future was bright, full of possibilities she had never dared to dream of. A few weeks later, Emily was standing in front of the large bay windows in her new home, looking out at the backyard where Lily was playing. The house was modest, but to Emily it was everything she had ever wanted: a place to call their own, a space where Lily could grow up surrounded by love and security. As she watched Lily run across the grass, her laughter filling the air, Emily felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. This was the life she had fought for, the life she had worked so hard to create. And while the road to get here had been long and difficult, every struggle had been worth it. Later that evening, as they sat down for dinner, Emily's phone buzzed with a message from Jonathan. "Jonathan, congratulations on the house. I'm proud of you." Emily smiled as she read the message, her heart full. Jonathan had been more than a boss. He had been a mentor, a friend, and the person who had seen potential in her when she hadn't seen it in herself. She typed a quick reply before setting the phone down and turning her attention back to Lily. "Emily, thank you. I couldn't have done it without you." As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, Emily's life continued to flourish. The promotion had been a turning point, but more than that, it had been a catalyst for change, a reminder that she was capable of so much more than she had ever believed. And while the road ahead would no doubt have its challenges, Emily faced the future with a renewed sense of confidence and strength. She had saved Jonathan's life that day in the alley, but in a way he had saved hers too. He had given her the chance to build something better for herself and for Lily, a chance she had taken with both hands. And now, standing on the other side of that journey, Emily knew that no matter what came next, she was ready. For herself, for Lily, for their future.